Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today are Hayley Andrews, investor, developer, CEO of Your Freedom Empire. Hi Hayley.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Good to be back.
Thank you for coming down. And with you is Ben Stroud, co-founder of Grange London Estate Agents. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Stephen.
Nice to have you back. Good to have your input. Okay, well, we'll get straight on with the questions. And Hayley, you're going first. When buying a property for rental investment, can the experts give me any guide on what are acceptable levels of yield versus the capital purchase value? Secondly, how do these values compare across the UK?
That's an open-ended question, really, isn't it? Because your requirements may be very different to mine, and Ben may have different requirements as well. I personally don't focus on yield alone. I focus on return on capital invested, I focus on cash flow, and I focus on time to free asset. I think that is a much more broader view of how hard the investment is actually working for you, and gives you a lot more information than that of just a gross yield, for example.
Sure.
But I would say, and experts would probably say, that a decent yield here in the UK, outside of London and Edinburgh, of course, you are looking at around, I would say, 6 to 8%.
Right.
It's pretty average.
When you're looking at a property, do you actually create a business model that you strictly adhere to?
I do. So I have a buying profile. I know what, in comparison to the rental or revenue that building can produce, how much I should be paying for it, on a very rough barometer. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, and you should always make sure that you do all of your numbers and make sure it stacks up financially. But yes, I do have a rule of thumb. One of the quick ways, and this doesn't always work, but a very, very quick way in answering the question for you to be able to understand, well, how much capital versus income, how do you gauge what a decent yield is? You can use what's called the 1% rule, and it doesn't always work. So there are exceptions to the rule, but 1%, the revenue needs to be 1% of the purchase, basically.
Okay.
For example, if you're in Scotland, sorry, Stephen, if you're in Scotland, that works very well. You can pick up a property, if you're just focused on yield, you can pick up a property for £40,000 to £50,000, and that will rent out on a per month basis between 425 to 500, 550. So there you go. You've got around around 11 to 12% yield there. Also, it meets the 1% rule, but it may be a profile of tenant that you're not looking to have within your investment portfolio. And then, of course, you have to look at other things as well, such as lending capability, leverage, and other things. It's an overall picture. It's not just about yield.
Yes. Yeah. What about time of the investment? So do you look to go in and come out of that in a set period of time? Have you got an ideal?
So it depends what strategy, and I'm using strategy loosely. It depends what strategy we're looking to adopt, really. But I look to, so if you're looking at a revenue point of view, so you're looking to keep that property in your portfolio for a long period of time, and we're looking at rental yield here, then I look to buy below market value, add value to foresee appreciation, refinance, and obviously rent that property out. So I focus there solely on return on investment.
Sure.
If that makes sense,
Okay.
and cash flow. So I will have different cash flow benchmarks that I look to achieve. And when I say cash flow, I mean net profit, not revenue. Okay, but what you can do, and of course yield will change area to area. You will have a different yield in Birmingham to that in London and in Scotland. So different parts of the UK, different areas of the UK, and even postcode to postcode will change. So one of the things the viewer can actually do to find out what the average yield in their area where they're looking to invest is they can look at sold comparables on Land Registry. You can do that through Rightmove or Zoopla, and they can look at the average rental that is achieved within that area by doing a very quick calculation, which is annual revenue divided by purchase cost. you will have a yield calculation there.
There's a super amount of information available to us these days on the internet.
There is so much, yes. Yeah, a lot of people will just focus on yield. It's obviously a quick gauge to be able to see if the investment is worth your time, but it's not the be-all and end-all of. You do need to look into the investment much further, and that is why I focus on return on investment, time to free capital, and cash flow.
Okay, thank you. Ben, London?
I agree with Hayley. I think there's so many moving parts to what makes a good investment. As far as London's concerned, if I'm going to be a bit more linear and just focus in on yield and capital growth, I mean, if you look at the past, I think a sort of blended average total return for London, Greater London over the last 40 years, is about 9%, which means you've outperformed commercial property. It means you've outperformed the stock market. I think that the big at the moment, and then zooming in on the detail at the moment, the big thing to watch out for in London is your gross to net, your service charge. And I've mentioned this before.
I don't want to talk about service charge.
Stephen at the
moment. As some people know well, it's really, especially if you're buying, if it's your home and you want all of the bolt-ons and the swimming pool and the concierge, go for it. Good luck to you. If it's an investment, you've got to be very, very careful because a lot of developments are sold with an estimated service charge, which will climb pretty steeply after the first few years. So you're best off buying it, especially if you're buying new build, which has less amenity for pure investment, or a good managing agent or a reputable developer that's got a track record of not doubling service charges in 5 years.
I think, Ben, there's two things there. I mean, I think developers, especially in London, are quite famous for, shall we say, politely distorting the service charge levels for the first couple of years while sales are still ongoing. I think that's quite a popular activity. Mm-hmm. I also think that, again, developers to create sales often offer guaranteed rental incomes, and I think on both counts, if you buy on that basis, you've got to be very careful what's going to happen to you in 2 years' time. And I've seen people actually sort of almost go into negative equity in terms of rental income at the end of 2 years. So very important to have a look at it. All right, thank you for that. So Ben, really to carry on from the earlier question, can the panel advise on whether, from a buy-to-let perspective, it's better to buy in less popular areas where the return versus capital investment is generally higher, but with a lesser capital gain, or in perhaps more prosperous areas where the yield is significantly less, but the property has a better long-term investment prospect?
Well, Stephen, I think once again it depends on your investment criteria. If you're getting towards the end of your investment career, you're probably going to be, you might want more income than capital growth, in the same way that you might choose government bonds over equities or riskier equities if you're talking to an IFA, or you might be earlier on in your property investment career and be looking for riskier, high capital growth strategies. So it depends on the person. Personally, I think there is a middle ground, and I'm talking here as a London-centric person once again, but
you and me both.
Fringe prime areas, think places like Shepherd's Bush, Pimlico, King's Cross, where you tend to find a really nice combination of good capital growth and a reasonably decent yield. Also, most importantly, follow the money. Go to places where huge amounts of money are being invested. Let someone else do the heavy lifting, and I'm talking here about 9 times out of 10 government money, or it could be private sector, but big infrastructure projects. Get in on areas where someone's investing billions in front of you, where you're investing your 500 grand.
But that does take time, Ben, doesn't it?
It can take a long time.
It's time well spent, though, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah.
Making sure you do your research and understanding the area is important, and that's one of the key things that a lot of people miss. They'll just focus on the property or the investment opportunity itself and not focus on the growth of that area and hence the growth of their portfolio.
It's important, isn't it, to make your investment strategy fit with your own personal aspirations and hopes for the future, really, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. We get a lot of questions sort of saying, why can't we put residential property into a pension fund, etc. Well, no, you can't technically, but there's nothing to stop property becoming your pension.
Exactly.
That's the real key to all this. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time, and I'm sitting with Hayley Andrews and Ben Stroud. So Hayley, your second question. With the ever increasing popularity of short-term holiday service lets, I thought I might take advantage of this and put my property on the market in that particular area. However, I've been informed that I may be in breach of local authority regulations and have now thought twice about it. Have the panel any advice for me?
Yes.
Right.
Very easy one, this one.
And I think we should probably avoid mentioning the company they're probably referring to in the question.
Yes. So it's a very easy question. The important thing is always to check with your local planning authority because they do have different views on what a serviced accommodation use classification should be. And it will depend on how that property is run as a business as well. So, for example, we were speaking earlier, London has the 90-day rule. So, of course, there's restrictions there. So you do need planning permission in order to operate Airbnb outside of those 90 days or serviced accommodation of any sort. So you would have to go down the route of a C1 classification. So the important thing here is always to check. And what you need to be asking the planning department is, if I am looking to let a property out for periods shorter than 6 months and charge on a night-by-night basis where the property is not going to be the primary residence of this person that's staying, do I require planning permission to change? Do I require a change of use on that property? Now, most councils will take the view, and this is where it does change area to area, and there's some councils that I've gone through, because I do operate in serviced accommodation, where I'm thinking that should definitely be C1 or at least sui generis, and you're happy for me to do it under C3. So the important thing is to get a paper trail because they do have different views. So while it should again be one size fits all, it very much depends on who's looking at the case. And the way the council or the planning department will look at this, or the view that they normally take, is there a primary change of use? So are you running the building any differently? So if you have a 2-bedroom flat, for example, and obviously London is an exception because there's a 90-day rule there, but if there are no local planning restrictions, what they will do is they will look at a primary change of use. So if you have a 2-bed flat, for example, and you are putting it on Airbnb or Booking.com, advertising to families, and they are going to be travelling together, staying together as one single household, then they may actually argue that there is no material change of use, therefore you can continue operating under C3. This is why it's important to ask. But if you are doing a large 4-bedroom house and you are renting the rooms out on a room-by-room basis, charging on a night-by-night, and it's not the person that's staying primary residence, then of course that is a material change of use. That clearly falls outside of the realm of C3 and should be C1 or sui generis. So it really depends on how you're going to be running that serviced accommodation. It depends on the council, it depends on local restrictions. So the important thing is, don't guess, always ask. They are there for a reason. Speak to a planning consultant and make sure that you're concrete before moving forward. The fines that you can get for operating serviced accommodation in areas where there are restrictions and you don't have the correct planning permission are really quite high.
Yes.
It's not worth it.
Okay. Before I just go to Ben on this, I'm just going to sort of go off on one about my experience of these sort of short lets. And it's a question, in part, of consideration of your neighbours and your co-owners in a building. People often say to us, well, why do the councils object? Why do people object to these overnight stays? Well, it's quite simple, actually. what some of these companies will do, and I hasten to add not all, but they will target a new building to market it because the apartments are fresh, they need no maintenance, and they do these overnight lets. Of course, the people that take those lets have got no interest in the building, so their suitcases will bash the walls, they'll leave the place in probably not too good a condition, and one thing and another, and the wear and tear on the building goes up phenomenally in percentage terms. But of course, then to rectify that wear and tear falls on the service charge 9 times out of 10.
Yes,
so therefore the service charge goes up. So it's actually a pretty sort of derogatory situation.
Well, a lot of the developments, so planning is one consideration when you're looking at serviced accommodation in any sort, but another consideration, of course, is the head lease. A lot of the head leases now and developments will have restrictions around short-term stays.
Yes, and also stated that the apartments are for the use of one single family.
Yes,
not a multiple of families over a period of a month.
And sometimes it will state an AST in there, which means it's not terms and conditions and cannot be let out on a night-by-night basis.
I mean, Ben and I have worked on same buildings in some case. I mean, I can remember just down the road here we had awful trouble with these overnight lettings. I mean, it was almost quite amusing sometimes. I can remember one of the concierge being a little confused when this rather elderly lady came downstairs in the lift and shouted at them, "On what time is dinner served?" which of course gave them the clue it was an overnight let. But,
I mean, in London, I think they have, perhaps even controversial, well, not controversially, but I think they have their part to play from a landlord's perspective. You're right, you can't long-term short let in London. There is this 90-day rule across all of London, if not most boroughs. But there are specialist short let operators popping up that will help a landlord fill a void, which can be really valuable. And I take your point about disturbance to the building, but if it's a loophole, you can.
It's flexibility of strategy.
Because if you lose a tenant as a landlord in November, which is the low season for letting, November, December, January, and you can wheel in someone for maximum 3 months, but perhaps a month to 3 months.
Yeah.
It gets you through that tough period. So
the thing to look at there, though, is your mortgage. If you have lending on that property, you have to have permission and consent to let the property out on a night-by-night basis.
You sure do. And the other considerations, of course, are your insurance, your contents insurance, your overall building insurance. Yeah. It's quite a serious issue, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's complex. It doesn't mean you can't do it. As long as you're doing it properly, you're getting the correct permissions, you're getting it in writing from the head lease if there are any restrictions in the lease that you're able to operate the property in that manner. You're checking out your either switching products, because quite often the mortgage provider won't allow you to continue, or renting out on a night-by-night basis. So you may have to switch to a more suitable product that would allow you to do that, or there may not be a mortgage involved. That's the best case scenario. What you are doing is you're making sure that you're doing everything as you should. You've got the correct permissions in place. You're not going to be operating for 6 months and then be closed down or your head lease pulled as a result of you, not adhering to that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ben, your question, which is almost a follow-on really, but I'm quite interested in this. We were talking before the show, you were saying that the letting market's really red hot at the moment, so that's good news, I suppose, if you're an enthusiast of renting.
Which we are.
Well, yes, I'm not sure how good it is socially. I worry about the people that rent throughout their life and then reach retirement age. I wonder how they're going to afford private rents if they haven't been able to save for a deposit or buy a home. It becomes very difficult. It's going to fall on the state at some point in time. So where our trusty leaders at the moment are saying, oh, it's all right, we're going to provide more rental accommodation and substitute that for housing stock. I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that. And it might be just the government's easy way out, but we won't get into politics. Anyway.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. But the question is, as a landlord who's suffered several voids during the last 18 months, I presume because of COVID probably, do the experts think I should lower my rents and relax a fairly rigid demand of high tenant standards to quickly fill these voids? Or would I be going down an irretrievably downward path which would eventually affect my investment.
Yeah.
Now that's a touchy one, isn't it?
I know what I would answer, but I'll let you go first.
My turn. I think that it depends on your situation. Once again, it depends on what, how high your monthly repayments are and how quickly you need to, how much pressure you're under. But I wouldn't. I
think we're talking principles here.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't advocate a knee-jerk reaction to lower rent straight away. I would hold the line for a while. If things aren't recovering quickly, don't forget that a standard, notwithstanding those short let 90-day operations we just mentioned, which is fraught and is complicated, admittedly, that's an option if your stars align, to get you through a tough period. If that's not long enough, don't forget an AST typically has a 6-month break clause. So I don't think you're setting yourself up for a giant devaluation of your asset if you have to accept a lower rent for 6 months to a year. It just gets you through a tough period. But I wouldn't do that immediately. I give it a few weeks.
When you say an AST has a break clause, do you mean it has a finite end at 6 months?
Yeah, well, it's standard AST a year with a 6-month break clause. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Hayley.
I wouldn't have a knee-jerk reaction either. I think that the rental market is very buoyant throughout many parts of the UK. You're seeing that, I'm seeing that. My portfolio is running at 98% occupancy. I'm really quite proud of that. The number of people that are coming through to go through the tenant referencing process in comparison to the properties that we have available is a clear unbalance. So we are putting rents up as a result. So we're not seeing the opposite, where we're having long voids. We've actually got double the amount of people looking to the stock we have available.
So the answer is hold your nerve.
Hold your nerve, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on that very positive note, we're going to wrap the show up. So Hayley Andrews, thank you very much for coming down. Ben Stroud, same again. Thank you to you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Join me again next time on Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and don't forget, if you have a question for our panel, do write in. Go to our website, propertytv.uk. See you next time.